Welcome back. Level One Coach Podcast, Drew and Mikhail here. And today we are going to get into we've probably overlapped a couple episodes just concept wise. I think what we're gonna dig into starts with like critical point, and that concept and just the idea of in coaching, a lot of the problems are people and energy first and less kind of Cody Royal-esque, like your tactics don't matter. So I wrote yesterday, I saw this article um, that was linked in one of this guy's Substacks. His Substack is Idaho basketball coaching, if you want to check that out. But anyway, he wrote about Dusty May, and we had been connecting on Substack. He reads some of my stuff. I've been reading some of his. But the Dusty May thing was intriguing to me because I've studied him a bit. And anyways, what he gets into and what this athletic article gets into, and we can put that in the show notes. But Dusty May takes the job at Michigan this offseason, and he was at Florida Atlantic previously. And the first thing you do as a coach is maybe dive into some game film on the Michigan Wolverines and just see what you're getting into and see what you see. And the maybe not so shocking to me, but the shocking part to maybe people on the outside or that aren't so privy to the power versus force stuff. But the three things that he decided were going to be his first steps to address with the team were thus: one, response to mistakes; two, showing empathy towards teammates; and three, learning how to communicate with each other better and or more. I'm going to kick that to you without giving too many of my thoughts away, and then we'll just go from there.
Yeah, what I love about this, and we can get into each one individually because I think they're pretty interesting pieces to pull out of watching film. But on a general level, what I love about this is that none of those things you mentioned have anything to do with the way they're playing on the court or what is actually happening with the basketball on any given play. It's not, we need to press harder, we need to shoot better, we need to take more selective shots, you name it. I'm running out of things I know about basketball, so let's stop there. But in hockey terms, like this isn't about the neutral zone structure. This isn't about the forecheck. It's not about special teams. It's not about goaltending. It's all about how it's first of all how you act as a human, and then second of all how you treat others, and whether those are your teammates, coaches, yourself. So I think it's pretty cool to hear. Like I think we've talked about Dusty May before. You sent me something about him when he was still at FAU. I think it was this past winter, it must have been. And so I like know a little bit about him, but that's really almost the extent of it. But I think it's cool that he would start there because I think anytime, and I honestly I can't claim to know where Michigan basketball is at from a standpoint of like they've been good recently or not. But I think anytime I'm gonna assume they haven't been great, just given new coach coming from what would maybe be considered a like lesser end or smaller end Division I program. Like I think anytime someone steps into that role, it probably feels overwhelming and like where do I start? And I think coaches naturally fall back on what's comfortable, which is the tactics and the strategy, the systems, the structure, because you've probably been doing that for years now. And even if you weren't doing it as a coach, then as a player. So for him to like almost overlook that intentionally while examining his new team and get down to like we're going to start with these core principles that have to do with you again as a person, not as a player. Like it couldn't be more refreshing for me to hear about.
Yeah. I'm with you. And like my first thoughts were they go back to like the critical point concept that we've talked about in a couple podcasts. But it's like you pose the question, where do I start? And I think the answer, in my opinion, is you try and find the critical point. And what he's realizing amongst other coaches, I'm currently reading Joe Maddon's book right now. And he kind of did a similar thing when he took over the Cubs. He saw that there was the traditional, like back in the day, I mean, 2016, it wasn't that long ago, but I think we've come a long way on like the hazing front since 2016. But it was just the traditional MLB high level, even junior hockey hazing stuff that goes on. And he found out about it, observed it right away, and was like, hey, the Cubs have like 145 million year curse. Um, and we're trying to like do right by the city, and like we have a chance to be good here. And we can choose to make that choice, or we can just choose to have this like traditional MLB experience for the rookies, and the vets get to do whatever they want. And we can do that, or we can like make a run at this. But like we can't do both. So decide. And again, Joe Maddon, really smart baseball guy. Joe Maddon can teach. I mean, he comes from level one. He said in his first role he was the pitching coach, the hitting coach, the third base coach, the whatever. Like he has a ton of range and a ton to offer. But instead of getting with some players that were struggling with their swing and just getting into hitting, he was like, hey, if the hazing doesn't stop, like we're not going anywhere. And to me, the Dusty May thing, excuse me, is the same thing. It's like I can have all these sweet set plays that he has, and people during March Madness were just fawning over his basketball tactics. But it's like I can have all this knowledge and even be able to teach it well. But like if we don't clean up the critical point, that's going to kind of create that quantum leap forward and inject some love and compassion and um, better behavior between teammates and coaches into the environment, then like the tactics and my set plays aren't going to take us anywhere. I'll kick that to you.
Yeah, I think what matters with the critical point is we talked about this before with the Mo Sider thing in Detroit, but being contrarian and right. So a lot of coaches could have come in, like you're saying, with the Cubs and been like, yeah, let's keep, tradition. We're a historic franchise. We've been here millions of years. And so like you guys do this and that, it's fine. We've got to improve our hitting, improve our pitching, whatever, and instead like find that critical point. So maybe it's with this, with the Michigan example, it seems to be how they treat each other and themselves. With the Cubs, whatever that critical point was, pick that critical point. Be contrarian with that. Like, and I don't mean I don't mean go out there and pick something different for the sake of picking something different, but identify what it is. And if that's different for your organization than anywhere else in the world or anywhere else you've ever been, that's okay. And honestly, that may mean that you're onto something because it's like an untapped thing that maybe other teams, programs, organizations aren't looking into. So that's one piece of it for me, like being contrarian and then being right. The other part is like I think this runs a little bit in the face of what the narratives become of coaches when they come in and they improve a situation. So like if you look at whatever Michigan basketball does in the next 2 to 3 years, like it'll be exactly most likely the narrative from other coaches and for sure from maybe not other coaches honestly, but it'll be the stuff you hear from the reporters. And if Michigan gets back to the Final Four and is competing for national championships and stuff, like you'll hear exactly what you just said people say about FAU, like, well, Dusty May runs these sick plays, or he's got this crazy whatever defensive structure, like he does this and that. and it'll likely all be around whatever happens on the court that the audience sees on a daily basis, or a game to game basis. And it'll fit this perfect narrative of like, he did that at FAU too. See how big of like a tactician genius he is. He did it there, he's doing it now. And in some regards, like I'm struggling to think of somebody off the top of my head from a hockey standpoint that also this could fit, but like I'm sure it exists in the hockey world as well, or I know it does. And I think what's so often left out of that conversation, and part of it is left out because it's unseen, like you literally don't know what's going on. And then the other part is like, I think players and coaches alike are afraid to just speak differently and not provide the same sound bites and just say like, yeah, like in this example with basketball, it's like the future Michigan basketball player that's being asked why they won the national championship in a couple of years or why they won the Big Ten championship, instead of saying like, we work hard and we're relentless on the ball and we shoot well, whatever. It's like, talk about this 2 or 3 year process that Dusty May started, where he was like, you need to respect each other, you need to treat your teammates better, you need to show empathy. Like that's where those are the building blocks, the foundations. Like, um, that I think that's where like the narrative gets a little twisted, and it's not even twisted, it just gets misconstrued into something that always has to do with the sport on the court, on the field, on the ice, and what's going on behind the scenes, which like is funny. Like you said you saw this on a blog called what?
Idaho Basketball Coaching Podcast.
Yeah, so that is most definitely not synonymous with CBS or ESPN or anything of that nature. So like you have to look so hard and also be so intentional with where you're spending your time to find shit like that. Whereas the stuff that is readily available that anyone can hear or read or see is just on ESPN about like their off the ball movement or whatever. So I think that's also part of the thing that I struggle with is like the truth lies in these really random obscure places, but the things that we're all being fed a lot of times as far as the narratives of why, Michigan basketball is going to be a powerhouse or why FAU was so good, that it's so different. It's not about the stuff on the court. It is about the stuff on the court only once you've dealt with the people, the humans, the stuff off the court. So I threw a lot at you there, so I'll let you build off that.
Yeah, it's just like what are the impressions that are creating the expressions, or like, I guess said simpler, what are the inputs that are creating the outputs? And like we see the dance of FAU and like their clinical offense or whatever they got going. I didn't study their basketball, I studied their coach. But that like expression of freedom on offense and the ability to make plays and be creative and do all that stuff, that's an output. And the input that leads to that, and that's why I write about what I write about, um it's all the stuff that's like not sexy to talk about. Like you want to get on ESPN and talk about like love and compassion and forgiveness and um, stuff like that, or do you want to just get the laser pointer out and start drawing circles around people and say, watch this ball screen here that turns into this, which creates space here? Like that's what everyone wants. I mean, that's even what the coaches that are, you know, talking in press conferences and talking about it, scouting showcases that you go to, like everyone wants, and we've gotten into this and I'll stay off the tangent, but like we all want to talk about the hockey stuff. um but that like that's an output. So like what are you doing on the other side of it, on the input side, that's creating that? And I don't think most people want to get into that. Maybe they think there's culture secrets or whatever that they don't want to give away, but that is the starting point. That's clearly the critical point in a lot of cases that a lot of smart coaches are starting to figure out. And the more light that we can bring to that with our 17 rabid listeners, the better.
Yeah, and we've talked about it before. It's like those things a lot of times, like you're mentioning with like talking about love or talking about trust or accountability or ownership or whatever it is within the team, like those things are really almost impossible to quantify. Like I don't know. And if anyone told me I can measure this for you, let me come and measure it for your team, I'd be like, you're full of shit. Like I don't know how that you can tangibly measure that. And then even worse, than that is like it's really hard to even um it's harder to even like try to measure it on a small time scale. So we can look at game to game. If I'm Dusty May, I can look at whether our shooting percentages have increased over the course of the last 5 games. I can absolutely measure that. I'm not sure, and honestly, I am sure that he is trying to do this, and I would be very curious to hear what he's doing to measure it. But how do you measure the empathy shown towards teammates over the course of the last 5 games? I bet you he does honestly have a way. And I'm blanking, and it may have been you or somebody else that was talking about a basketball coach. Where was I listening to this? That has a way of they have um these different metrics they're looking at within a game. So one of their assistant coaches will keep track of like how many high fives one of their guys gives. He's measuring each guy, how many high fives are given, how many like come off the court and like, whatever knuckles or fists that you give to the guys on the bench. They're measuring like all these. Was this you that was talking about this or no? I feel like I was reading this somewhere. About an NBA coach, and I can't remember. It may have been like a long time coach, not currently in the league. But anyway, stuff like that, like even if you are measuring it in that capacity, I can guarantee that stat is not going up on anything post game on ESPN or anywhere like that. And honestly, it's probably not even something that most coaches or players would want to talk about or divulge that they are doing for fear of like losing that perceived edge or whatever. So I think that's why those statistics of, shooting percentage or special teams in hockey or whatever, that's why um those narratives get pushed, I think, because they're measurable and they're just something that is undeniable. You can't play a basketball game and then as Michigan try to hide your free throw percentage. Like that's out in the open. We're all gonna know it. So I think that's part of the reason why. But I also do think that the more guys like Joe Mazzulla who will get up there and just be like, we're not talking about X. This is what it's about, or this is what I believe in. The more that these kinds of not only these kinds of coaches, but I think these kinds of ways of measuring things and also like ways of looking at teams as more of like a true family unit that needs to improve as a group and not just like a bunch of individuals trying to make the machine roll down the hill. I think the more you get guys like that answering honestly and being upfront with what they do and how they do it, the more I think we will see those types of things become quote mainstream.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. The one thing that I wrote down before the show, I knew we were going to kind of get into culture. And this would be a take that a Joe Mazzulla would give, so I'll throw it to you now. But I was just like writing down, and again, not trying to be like contrarian for contrarian's sake, but like it just came to me like, why do we even have culture, and why is Dusty May choosing to go down the road that he's going down with 3 non-linear, so non-tangible. Like you're right, you can't measure love. And like if you're gonna do the before I get into this quote or this thing I wrote down, just on what you said, like before all 17 of you that are listening to this start tracking high fives, um, make sure that the players don't know. Because again, if you measure it and you put it in the open that you are measuring it, then it gets corrupted and people are giving non-integrous, to go back a few episodes, high fives, and you don't want non-integrous high fives, and you don't want non-integrous energy. So before you all go tracking high fives, as great of an idea as that is, and on like the right path that is to trying to quantify something that's non-linear, you can't let the players know that you're doing that. Just forewarning on incentives. But what I'll throw back to you is a little bit of a hot take, maybe. This wouldn't do well on Twitter. Culture is to rewrite poor traditions and for tough times.
Say it again.
Culture, like, to throw one more word of context, culture's purpose is to rewrite poor traditions and for tough times. And I can throw some meat on that if you want.
Yeah, take it a little further.
Okay, so I was thinking about a Mike McDaniel quote, and I think I shared this with you, and we talked about it off air a while ago. But on one of his podcasts, or one of the podcasts he did, I think it was the Jump one that I sent you, and we can link that. I'll find it. But he was like, I can't wait for our first 3-game losing streak. And like, that's something that an NFL head coach doesn't say a lot. Did I share this with you?
Yeah.
Okay. So like, he's like, I can't wait for our first 3-game losing streak. And like, I was like, that's what culture's for. Like, he wants to see the response to adversity. And that's a muddy, gross, disgusting word in coaching that gets overused. But the point is, like, if you think of like, if Mike McDaniel's culture was Ted Lasso's culture, let's just say Mike McDaniel believes in believe and his yellow sign. And it's super easy to believe when you win the first 3 or 4 games of the year, when you're on top of the division. Like, you don't need culture, the behavior, the energy, people being happy to come to work is going to take care of itself when you're 4-0 and on top of the AFC East. I think that's what division they're in. But anyway, like, you don't need believe, or you don't need Jackie Moon's everybody love everybody, or you don't need your version of whatever your culture is. You don't need that when everything's going well. Like, so for Mike McDaniel to be like, I can't wait to see what we have when we go on our first 3-game losing streak, like, that was the eye opener to like why culture is needed and why you have to, like, player interactions are great if Michigan didn't need a new head coach. If Dusty May wasn't required to step in and things are going way better for them and they were more on the path of Michigan hockey right now, then like, they probably don't have issues with interactions between coach and players. They probably don't have poor interactions between players. They probably don't need to communicate more and better. So I hope that's a little bit more meat for you. I'll kick that over to you.
Yeah, no, that was great. I think there's 2 parts, obviously, to what you're saying. Like, part of culture is to rewrite tradition, and I think that's true. I think that one to me is super dependent on where you're at and also what that tradition is. Like, if you are stepping into the tradition at Minnesota hockey, like, I don't know how much you need to rewrite. You know, you may need to add things or improve things, but like, there's a rich history of a ton of success there. Now, take some other program that hasn't had that success, then you might need to rewrite a lot of that tradition. And I forget where I don't, like, everyone talks about this, but I've always thought it's an interesting statement, and I do agree with it, of like, one of the worst responses to like, well, why do we do this? Say you ask a player on your team, like, why do you guys do that? And the response is like, well, we've always done it that way. Like, that's like one of the worst replies you get. So that's tradition, but that doesn't necessarily mean this tradition is beneficial or positive. So I think rewriting, it does make sense. It's dependent on where you're at and what that history is like. But I think the second one of like, culture is for tough times, or its purpose is for tough times, that is true unequivocally all the time, anywhere. And whether that tough time occurs in the first game of the year, or you're undefeated and it occurs in the national championship, your culture will be tested at some point. And it's usually when you're losing. It could be when you're winning, honestly, depending on things going on. But it's usually when you lose and when things don't go the way you had imagined them going. And I think the best teams, like I say this all the time, and I firmly believe this. And when I'm 85 years old and retired, if it's proved me wrong, then I'll admit it maybe. But I don't think it's wrong. Like at whatever level you're looking at. So say you're looking at the NHL or you're looking all the way to Division 3 where I'm coaching now, like doesn't matter. The talent for the most part amongst most of the teams. I mean, for sure in the NHL, probably most of teams in Division 1, most of teams in Division 3, the talent amongst, call it 1 through 30, 1 through 50, 60, it's pretty close. Like, sure, there are going to be some high-end talent, and then maybe there's some that don't have that. But like the talent itself is pretty damn similar. I firmly believe what allows teams to be better than another, to win more games than another, to win more championships than another is the culture. Because if it was just the talent, like you'd have, I guess, you'd have so much variability that like on any given year anyone could win. And that is true to a degree, but when you really look at like if you look at the teams that you're mentioning in Division 1, like Michigan hockey's been in the Frozen Four 3 years in a row now. Like if it were just talent, then somebody else with similar number of first rounders would have beaten them one year to get to the Frozen Four. Or if you look in Division 3, I mean, I'll gladly throw Hobart's name out there. Like they've won 2 national championships back to back, and they've been a contender in Frozen Fours. They were in the Frozen Four my senior year, going back 5 or 6 years ago now. So for at least the last 5 or 6 years, they've been that good. And yes, they have superb talent for the Division 3 level. They also, I have no idea, I don't know anyone on the team, but they must have a superb culture too, because they've been able to achieve really, really, they've been a high achieving team on the ice, and that's great, and that wins you a bunch of games. But then they've won games in pivotal moments in national tournament, conference tournament stuff that, like, in my opinion, that's where the culture truly comes through. So my point of all of that is that those tough times that teams ultimately go through usually is when your tester or when your culture is tested the most. And when I think you find out whether or not the culture you think you truly have. And I think the teams that again, year over year, consistently compete for conference or national championships or Stanley Cups or Calder Cups or whatever the hell trophy it is, they're able they're able to win a lot of games due to the talent, yes, but they're able to consistently be a contender due to their culture. So to what you're saying, I mean, 100%, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, to circle back to the very beginning of your take where I left off with that quote that I wrote down. Like rewriting tradition, just to like add more clarity so people aren't like, Drew, you're an idiot. But like with your Minnesota hockey example, and I think of Michigan hockey recently, and I also think of the Cubs that was in Maddon's book too. But like you don't blow up the tradition of the Chicago Cubs, but you blow up traditions within the Chicago Cubs. So like the hazing was a tradition that like critical point have to get rid of. But like what the Chicago Cubs stand for and like their historic tradition outside of like behavioral tradition, that's kind of that's probably a better like clarifier. Like behavioral traditions might need to change. So like with Michigan hockey, you don't have to, when Brandon Hirado as an alum takes over, he's not going to be like, it's not going to look like Michigan hockey anymore. And we're going to take down all of this history and we're going to throw Red Berenson's photos out of Yost. Like, he didn't do any of that. Like, that's ridiculous to think. But the tradition of like they're kind of going to this Dusty May thing, how coaches were talking to players, how coaches were interacting with staff. Don't need to get into all that, but like there were things that needed to change, and that's where Good Dudes Only came from, which is their tagline, or at least it was in their first year. So that's just like a clarifier to, you don't blow up what Michigan hockey is, you don't blow up what Minnesota hockey is, you don't blow up what the Cubs are, but there are behavioral traditions within that that, if cleaned up, will create massive leaps forward in terms of the output that you see on the ice, on the field, whatever. So
Yeah. And I think that's pretty much the same thing I was saying, as far as like, you've got to look at what are those traditions that are maybe holding us back, or maybe not even holding us back, but are not allowing us to go forward. So they're just keeping us in neutral. And they're things that we've done that maybe work. They definitely, you could go so far as to say that they don't not work. They're not bad. They're just things that, could we change them and improve them to have a positive, or a more positive impact on our culture. And I think that gets back to the contrarian and right and the critical point pieces of like, it's important to figure out what those things actually are, and make sure that you're not looking at this and making a quick or hasty decision, because you're like, we got to change something. We got to make sure, like talked about this before, of like coming in and you're Brandon Arado or you're Dusty May, and you're like, I got to make my mark here. I've got to improve and change something, and just being willing to change anything for the sake of change versus change the right thing or change the critical thing. And those are conversations, questions that I think take time, and you have to be extremely intentional with, to make sure that you're not, you brought up like hazing things with the Cubs. Like maybe at that time, certain guys on the Cubs didn't view blank as hazing, and it was like a thing that actually brought the team together. Or maybe the opposite, they viewed something that, um, the captains or the leaders were like, no, this is team building, and the players that had to go through it were like, no, this is hazing and we hate it. And so there's got to be like an intentional look from the coaches to figure out, and the leaders to figure out, like, what are these critical points for our organization that we need to consider rewriting, consider changing, to get the most out of it. And the one other thing I'll say on this is, like, I don't really think that there's, honest to God, any one right or wrong answer with this. Like, it is so dependent on where you're at and who the players on your team are, what like the expectation is for your program, and also that you set for yourself. That, like, in one sport, in one organization, one league, this could mean completely reconsidering how you do the preseason, because you could be a team that, I don't know, that has, it's like, you could be in college, a fall sport, where you need to consider, like, what do we do in the preseason to be ready when they show up on campus? And at the same time, you could be a professional organization, and this might have more to do with how you deal with the stretch of the middle of the year when things aren't going well. Like, there's so many different critical points, and there's no one right or wrong thing. And if you hear that, you said this already, like, don't now go measure high fives and tell all the players you're doing that, because they'll be non-integrous high fives. But at the same time, like, don't hear Dusty May say he's measuring like blank, or he's watching his empathy of his players towards their teammates, and then go say that's what we need to do. Maybe you do. Maybe that is what your organization needs. But be willing to look at this with more of like, this is a principle I'm trying to find a similarity between what Dusty May is doing and what I need to do. Don't think that it's like he does it, I need to do that same thing now. Because if I guarantee you this, if Dusty May would have gotten that job that our other boy, Sundance something. What was his
Wicks.
Sundance? Wicks. And he's the head coach, right, in Wyoming, or
Yeah.
assistant? So if Dusty May would have gotten the job in Wyoming that Sundance got, I bet you he'd be looking at something different or seeing something different when he watched the film of the Wyoming players. That doesn't mean they're better or worse. It just means they need different things, or they have different things to work on. So that's just my other, like, I guess, little passionate piece I have of, like, don't just think you got to now go be Brandon Arado or be Dusty May with what you do. Like, find out what that difference maker is for you. Because it's honest to God, it should be different for you versus them versus someone else.
Yeah, I'll bring it kind of full circle with something that we talked about a couple episodes ago, but like I think the best coaches, and like everybody knows like Brandon Arado, for example, that he's like a player development guy. Some people would use the term guru. But like knows what he's doing in that department. And I think the testament to him and the testament to other good coaches, like what Dusty May is doing, is when you have range and you really like to use that like Maddon vision cone, for example, like the more range you have or the bigger that vision cone is, the less that you're going to want to use your specific, I'm really good at this solution. So like there are other people that are very good player developers that would take over a team and say, the problem is player development and I'm the guy to fix it, and we're going to do it player development based. Here's how. And I think to subordinate what you're like known for to really attack the critical point is a testament to like really being able to survey the scene and press again the right button. But to not do it and to not just go after the solution that you think, or the solution that you're like most known for. So like to give you an example of this, my current gripe is with skating coaches right now. And the thing, like I put this out on Twitter and we talked about in a couple episodes ago, like the shot blocking thing. So you can go back and we talked about critical point with like blocking a shot in the foot, and what like your average coach that's just seeing it through a coaching lens sees, and then what someone that has a little bit more range might deduce. And where I'm getting with all of this is I put out a tweet the other day about like I hear youth coaches, because I'm in rinks again now, and they're doing skating at the beginning of practice or whatever, and they're just yelling at kids to bend their knees. And again, I come from strength conditioning background, how the body will self-organize or limit itself based on maybe what's going on in various parts of the body. So I just survey the scene. Okay, he's picking on this kid for bending his knees, and I just like I'll literally walk to the other side of the rink if he's on the other side of the rink just to get a closer look, because this is how weird I am. But like the kid's laces will be wrapped around his ankles, eyelets all the way to the top. Sometimes he'll have tape on it. So like his ankle is so restricted that he's not going to be able to bend his knees and get like positive shin angle, which you need to be an effective skater. So like you can say bend your knees all you want, and you can be the power skating guy that says sink your hips, bend your knees, you have to get low. But like if you physically can't do it, then like we have to attack a problem that isn't my power skating answer based. It's physical. Like there's physical restriction on the athlete's ankle that's not letting him do what you need him to do. So like you can keep regurgitating power skating stuff, or you can be like, hey kid, come to the bench, let me tie your skates. We'll skip the second eyelet, we'll loosen it up 10%. We won't wrap around the back. and magically he'll be able to skate better, sink his hips, and bend his knees. And it's like, if you only have, I'm not going to do the hammer thing. You can do that. I'll kick it to you.
I think, yeah, I won't do it again because I honestly get a little dicey with that one too, and sometimes mess it up. But I think this is this is why I think the best coaches are great synthesizers, and they can look at the full picture and figure out what is actually going on here. So with your example, like this kid's knees can't bend. Is that because he's immobile? Is that because he doesn't want to listen? Is that because he's literally not listening? Is it because he doesn't care? Is it because he has no muscle because he's 4 years old? Like, is it because his skates are too tight? Like, there's so many possibilities when a player is that young, not bending their knees, that if you only address one or two of them being he's not listening and he's not trying hard enough, and then you write him off, like you're leaving a lot on the table that could be going on that you're not addressing. And I'm absolutely positive that there are plenty of skills or skate coaches out there that don't do that, that will look at the full picture and be like, hey, what do I need to do to make sure this kid can bend his knees? But if all you have is a hammer, then all you're going to see is a nail.
There it is.
And I think that's where coaches can do a better job of identifying, like, okay, I want end result. Like, I'm going to bring it back to the Michigan basketball stuff. Like, I'm Dusty May and I want wins because wins keep me here as head coach, which means my children eat nice dinners and live in a nice house and have a nice life. And so that's my end result. How do I get wins? Do I scream and yell and F my players up and down the bench? Do I improve our shooting? Do I recruit better? Like, what do I do? And everyone has their own thing that maybe needs to improve in order to do that. But recognizing that, like, it's not just going to be recruiting players, it's not just going to be shooting better. It's probably going to be a synthesis, a combination of different things that I need to do. And that's where, to your example with the skating stuff, it's like if you're only aware of one or two pieces that go into this, then you're missing this greater picture. And it's probably a gripe I think a lot of players I've heard have with skills coaches is like, well, I'm learning how to stick handle better or skate better or shoot better, but then I'm in game scenarios or practice and I can't figure out how to make it work. I can't get it off. And that's where it's like you got to build translatable and replicable skills that will apply now to the game. So anyway, yeah, I think you can't just look at things through one lens. And to use your Maddon like cone of vision, is the wider your vision can be, the more likelihood you're going to have to address the right problem. It doesn't mean you're always going to swing um, or bat 1,000 and be correct on it, but you're going to improve the chances that you didn't miss something or that you didn't overlook something because you were so focused on, something else over here when it was really over here. So yeah, that's where my mind goes with that.
Yeah, I've got more to build on that, but I have to get a haircut. So we're gonna wrap there, and we will pick up next time. Before I go do that, share the show if you got some value, and we will see you on the next one.